In the program, the type of loom that we use is this sort of loom. It's just a piece of wood with two dowels in the center, and you can see on the ends that they're screwed in, so the holes are created on the one side. Dowels are put in, and then screws are put in to secure them, because you don't want these to move. You want to have these quite firm and stable. The other type of loom that we also use for really large projects is what we call a weaving loom. Those are the two different types of looms in the program. So the first thing we're going to talk about before we actually get into wrapping the loom is determining how many threads that you need on your loom. There's a little bit of a confusion here. When we wrap a loom, we have a number of beads that fit into our graph. So that's what determines how many wraps we put on there, or how many threads we have on there. Let's see. With this piece, you can see where I've wrapped it. I know the number of beads that I want, but I have to add extra threads on. Now the extra threads, we have 2 on the outside, and then the rest are all single. It's really important because when we have those 2 threads on the outside, what it helps do is add stability to your work. So when we have stability to our work, it actually helps prevent a lot of pulling in of the side thread, and then you get these little V's, concaves, or they go into your beads. You do not want that to happen because it's not a very attractive piece and it just doesn't look right. The other thing, when we have double threads on the outside, when we go to sew our work down, whether we're adding edge work or whether we're doing sewing it to a piece of leather or any sort of background fabric, it adds stability to that as well. And we don't have that chance of pulling those skinny threads and causing our work to go all weird. So you always want to have 2 threads on the outside. So the way that we determine the number of threads that we put on there is it's always the number of the number of beads plus 3. So for this one, I have 2, 4, 6, 7 beads, and that means 7 plus 3, I have to put 10 threads on. If you're wondering where I get the number 3 from, okay, we have to have 2 on the outside, so that's plus 2. There has to be a thread on both the outside and inside of every bead. So 1, there'll be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then this side outside is 8. So it's always plus 3 because you add the 2 more onto there. 8 plus 2 is 10. So always remember that. If you're having difficulty, if you're following a graph design, count the number of squares, like the lines to the squares or the lines to the beads. That'll always help you. But always remember, it's the number of beads plus 3. So all I do is, of course, double thread, put a knot on one end, thread the amount of beads, and then make sure that it goes across your loom length, and then tie a knot in the other end. Once you get that, hold them down and tape over. Make sure that it sits snug. Let's see. You can see that this moves around a little bit. That's okay. Right at the moment, it's not a big deal, but later on it does become a big deal. We need to be able to for it to have that movement. We don't want our knot sitting right up close to the tape like this, and the same on the other side. We want to keep a little bit of looseness in there, and you'll understand later on when I show you about turning your work. Now we're going to talk about wrapping the loom. We have everything set up on the edges, so we have our beads, and we've done it to both sides, so equal amount of beads on both sides. So one of the first things that you want to do once you've got your beads on is we're going to take our thread and we're going to tie it onto one of these bars back here. Now, this tie has to be able to be undone. So it has to be an undoable tie or undoable knot or whatever, but we need to be able to get this undone once we've got our wraps on. And there's a reason why, and you'll understand completely. So if you notice, I've just done a simple little half hitch, whatever, I don't know what it's called. I'll pull this tail later on and it'll come apart. We start from the back. Well, it doesn't really matter, but I prefer the short way around because I want to end up with my tie on top here. So I want to end up with it being on top here. One of the things that I will advise you is when you're working off a spool of thread, just set it on the floor. We're going to try and keep this centered as much as possible. And we have it coming over. And I generally don't turn my loom too much. I rely on just what I see from the front. So there's one. Keep it on the outside. Now, you can see I have my two on the outside here. And then one in the center. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just push them so that they're sitting close, right? Because one of the things to remember, if I have it sitting way out like this, and then I go later on and push it all close, what happens is that's a lot of thread that's being used there. So when I get it in here more, it keeps it tight. Now, when I get about halfway, I like to do a double check, and you can see on this back side here, I'm just going to hold on to this. You can see on this back side how it's gone out a little bit. So all I do is just tuck those back in together, make sure that they're nice and close. Here it doesn't matter if they sit fairly close. You just don't want them to sit too wide apart, because once they do that, like I said, you get a little bit of excess thread. Little things like this are not hard to fix. You just lift your thread, move it. The only thing you want to make sure is that you keep your lines nice and straight. So the one that comes from the center here ends up going through the same two at the top. I'm going to undo my thread. So now we tie a knot, and it's just, we want to tie a couple of, like more than two, so pretty close to 3. So knowing that our knot is here, we know that our work cannot go past like this point into that area. It can go this other way around, but we don't want this knot sitting in our work whatsoever. So that has to be on the edge. So you can see I have 2 pieces here, but there's not enough room to do another one, but I have a whole bunch of room on the other area. So what I want to do is turn my work. So the beads here, I'm going to actually push them down into the front. So once I have the beads pushed down, we don't want to pull them off or out. Like I said, we want to make sure that they're going to be there when we get finished turning. So I just push them so that they sit underneath the, I'm just trying to grab that bead, make sure that I don't have any little accidents when I go. So I make sure that it's sitting under the work, and then what you do is you have to get a firm grip on your beadwork, and then you push. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten my beads up, pull them back to the top. So I'm going to keep moving these threads so that my beads are sitting back in place, and you're ready to go again.